a massive dam just to capture some beautiful footage. But only minutes later, his camera recorded something that sent chills down his spine. What he saw on the water and beneath the surface could have led to disaster and put thousands of lives at risk. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. The road wound through a dense forest of pine and oak, the early morning air crisp and cool as it drifted in through the cracked window of Laurent's truck. He kept one hand lightly on the wheel, the other resting on the worn leather armrest, his gaze steady as the sun slowly broke the horizon. Golden beams pierced through the treetops, scattering light in shifting patterns across the cracked asphalt. It was a drive he had made countless times in his life, but today it felt different. Ahead, just beyond the bend and the final climb, stood the dam, a monument of concrete, steel, and human ingenuity, holding back the force of millions of gallons of water. For Laurent, it was more than just an engineering project. It was a symbol, a reminder of the power of discipline and control, and a fascination that had never loosened its grip on him. When he pulled into the overlook, he turned off the engine and let the silence wash over him. For a long moment, he sat in the cab, staring down through the break in the trees at the colossal structure spread out below. The dam stretched across the valley like the wall of some ancient fortress, its sheer face catching the light of the rising sun. On one side, the reservoir stretched wide and calm, its surface glittering as if sprinkled with shards of glass. On the other side, water surged into the river below, white foam exploding against the rocks with a roar that carried all the way to his vantage point. Laurent finally stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He drew in a deep breath, savoring the mix of pine resin and cool mist rising from the valley. The air had a sharp bite, but it only invigorated him, pulling him fully into the moment. He stood there for a time, arms crossed, watching the steady stream of water crash below the dam. This was where he always felt something stir within him, a strange mix of peace and awe. Some men sought out churches for answers, others returned to their hometowns. For him, these massive structures of concrete and steel were sanctuaries. They reminded him of what people could accomplish when they dared to confront nature itself. His hand brushed against the worn case slung over his shoulder, and he smiled faintly. Inside was his drone, carefully packed with the precision of a soldier. Every cable coiled neatly, every spare battery stored in its place, every part polished and checked. The drone had become an extension of himself, just as vital as the rifle had once been during his years of service. He crouched near the flat patch of ground beside the overlook and began to set up his equipment, laying each piece out with quiet ritual. The motions were practiced, common, and they carried with them the memories of another life. As he assembled the drone, his mind drifted back to his years in uniform. He remembered long nights in remote bases where he was tasked with building makeshift barriers, reinforcing bridges, or improvising solutions when resources ran thin. He had been trained not only to fight, but to understand the infrastructure that made survival possible. Concrete, water pressure, steel reinforcement, explosives. He had known all of them intimately, too intimately. He had watched a poorly maintained levee collapse in a storm, taking lives with it. He had seen enemies exploit weak points in dams or bridges, turning feats of engineering into instruments of destruction. Those memories never truly left him, no matter how many years passed. After leaving the military, he told himself he would put that part of life behind him. He would live quietly, without the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. And yet, he found himself constantly drawn back to these places, to dams and power plants, to bridges spanning deep rivers. To him, they weren't just structures. They were living things, embodiments of mankind's struggle against chaos. They represented order, control, and balance. And perhaps, deep down, he also sought them out because they gave him purpose when everything else seemed to drift further from his grasp. He finished assembling the drone and ran his hand over its sleek frame. It wasn't the most advanced model money could buy, but it was reliable, upgraded with parts he had saved for and installed himself. He remembered the skeptical look his sister had given him when he first showed it off. She had laughed, saying he could have spent his money on something useful, something that wasn't just a toy. But Laurent knew better. This wasn't a toy. It was his way of seeing the world from angles no human eye could reach. It was a way to connect with his fascination, to capture the beauty and enormity of these marvels of engineering. The faint hum of the drone filled the morning as its propellers spun to life, slicing through the cool air with steady rhythm. Laurent guided it up, his fingers steady on the controls, his eyes fixed on the live feed streaming to his screen. The machine responded smoothly, rising above the overlook, catching the first full rays of the sun. As it hovered high, the dam filled his screen, its immense structure dominating the frame. He zoomed in slowly, studying the precise lines, the reinforced joints, the spillways where water foamed white against steel gates. A smile tugged at his lips. To most people, it was just a dam, a backdrop for photographs or a point of interest on a road trip. But to him, it was art, as moving as any painting in a gallery. He traced the contours of the wall with the camera, noting where the concrete showed subtle discoloration, where maintenance crews had patched it over the years. Nothing escaped his attention. It was a habit he couldn't break, the ingrained instinct to observe, analyze, and record. Yet there was no urgency now, only admiration. The rising sun lit the reservoir, turning the water into a shimmering expanse of liquid gold. Birds circled above, their wings flashing silver as they dove toward the river below. The forest that stretched out beyond the dam seemed endless, rolling hills cloaked in a dense green canopy. It was beautiful in a way few people stopped to notice, and he let himself breathe it in, every sight and sound, as though he could store it away for when he needed it most. Still, as he piloted the drone higher, he couldn't help but think about the irony of it all. These structures were built to hold back destruction, yet they were also constant reminders of how fragile that control really was. He knew better than most that even the strongest wall could crack under the right pressure, and once it broke, once the balance was lost, the results would be catastrophic. He shook the thought away, unwilling to cloud the morning with dark reflections. For now, this was a moment of peace, a reminder of why he returned again and again to these places. The drone hovered in silence, the dam standing unshakable against the rush of water, and Laurent felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. He thought of the men who had built it decades ago, working in heat and cold, pouring concrete and laying steel with a sense of purpose that few in modern life ever felt. He wondered what they would think, knowing their work was still holding strong, admired by a lone man and his machine on a quiet Saturday morning. Laurent adjusted the controls, circling the drone in a wide arc, capturing the majesty of the reservoir and the symmetry of the dam. His mind was calm, his heartbeat steady. For him, this was not just a hobby, but a calling. The world outside might have grown chaotic and unpredictable, but here, above the roar of the water and the hum of the drone, everything felt steady, solid, and under control. He didn't yet know that this morning would shatter that illusion. For now, he was simply a man with a drone, recording the magnificence of a dam that, in his eyes, stood as proof that order could triumph over chaos. And yet, in the stillness, there lingered a whisper of unease. He told himself it was just the echoes of memory, the remnants of a soldier's caution that never truly faded. But, deep inside, he felt the first flicker of tension, as if the dam itself was holding its breath. Soon, the calm would break. Soon, he would discover that his fascination with these structures was about to pull him into something far greater than he had ever imagined. The drone hovered smoothly above the valley, its camera sweeping across the massive dam and the glittering water that stretched far behind it. Leron leaned into the screen, absorbed by the live feed, his eyes tracing every detail as though he were inspecting the surface of an old friend. The hum of the rotors was steady, almost soothing, and for a while he let himself be carried away by the sheer beauty of the landscape unfolding from above. The symmetry of the dam, the mirror-like calm of the reservoir, the mist rising from the roaring river below, it was all exactly as he had hoped it would be when he set out that morning. Yet, as the drone shifted in its arc, something unusual caught his attention. At first, it was just a speck on the water, a shadow against the reflection of the sun. He almost dismissed it as a floating log or a clump of debris washed loose from the shore. But when he adjusted the angle and zoomed in, the shape clarified. It was no log. It was a boat, an old barge anchored or drifting near the spillway where the dam released its controlled fury into the river. Leron frowned and tilted his head closer to the screen. The barge looked weathered, its paint long since worn away by sun and water, leaving behind a blotchy mix of rust and faded color. The deck was cluttered, but what drew his eyes immediately were the crates stacked unevenly in the center. They were lashed down with rope, though not carefully. The knots looked haphazard, some frayed as though they had been pulled tight in haste. The entire scene had an air of neglect, of something left where it did not belong. He adjusted the drone to get a closer view. The water rippled softly around the hull, but there was no sign of life on board. No crew, no movement, nothing to suggest that anyone was watching over it. That, in itself, was strange. He knew dams often had support vessels for inspections and maintenance, but never left abandoned and adrift. Every tool, every boat, every piece of equipment was usually accounted for, monitored, and locked in place. To leave a vessel floating so close to the spillway unsupervised was not just careless, it was unthinkable. For a moment, he tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was part of some ongoing project, something left temporarily while workers went on break or shifted to another task. Maybe they would be back soon, and he was simply overanalyzing because of the instincts drilled into him from his years in service. Still, the longer he watched, the less convincing that explanation felt. His chest tightened as he zoomed further in, scanning the deck for any sign of markings. The crates had no labels, no stenciled warnings, nothing to identify what they held. That was unusual. Most containers near a dam bore clear tags: fuel, tools, machinery, chemicals, because regulations demanded it. The silence of the barge through the drone's feed unsettled him. He could almost feel the stillness, as though the vessel itself was holding something back, waiting. He circled the drone slowly around it, keeping the camera steady, capturing angles from the sides and the stern. The ropes securing the crates fluttered slightly in the breeze, and a shiver ran down his spine. They looked wrong, sloppy. He knew the difference between order and carelessness, and this was not how professionals handled their gear. He let the drone rise a little higher, pulling back for perspective. The barge seemed even more out of place when seen in the full scale of its surroundings. The dam loomed in the background, solid and immovable, while the barge sat hunched against the water like an intruder. The contrast gnawed at him. Everything about the dam spoke of strength, precision, and discipline. The barge spoke of neglect, secrecy, and something else, something that did not belong here. He thought back to his time in uniform, to the constant vigilance he had been trained to maintain. How many times had his instructors hammered into him that danger often appeared ordinary at first? A box left too close to a fence, a truck parked slightly out of place, a package without a sender's mark. Tiny details that others overlooked were the very ones that concealed threats. He had learned the hard way that ignoring such signs could end in disaster. A voice in his head tried to push back, telling him he was being paranoid, that this was just a boat. He was no longer in the army. This was supposed to be a day of peace, a morning spent indulging in the harmless fascination of a man with a camera drone. And yet, the unease deepened with every second he studied the barge. It wasn't paranoia if the signs were real. He leaned closer to the controller, narrowing his eyes as he brought the camera down once more. There were details he hadn't noticed before, scratches along the crates, as though they had been dragged across rough surfaces, patches of discoloration where the wood had been stained by something darker than water. He told himself it could all be innocent, explained away by routine wear and tear, but his gut refused to agree. His instincts screamed otherwise. Glancing up from the screen, Laurent looked out across the valley with his own eyes. From his vantage point, the barge was invisible, hidden by distance and the angle of the dam. Only through the drone could he see it clearly, and that realization made his stomach turn. It meant that anyone standing nearby, anyone on the overlook or even at the base of the dam, would never know it was there. If not for his drone, it would remain unseen, unnoticed, until perhaps it was too late. The thought left him uneasy. He remembered a phrase one of his sergeants used to repeat: "What you notice might save lives. What you ignore might end them." Laurent had always believed that, and the words echoed now louder than ever. He tried to shake them off, telling himself that he was jumping to conclusions, but the feeling clung to him stubbornly. He guided the drone into another slow pass, capturing every angle he could of the barge and its mysterious cargo. His heart thudded with a tension he hadn't expected to feel this morning. It was supposed to be just another trip, another quiet day to marvel at the engineering wonder before him. But the presence of that silent, unmoving barge had shifted everything. The peaceful calm that had filled him earlier was gone, replaced by an uneasy weight that settled into his chest. Something wasn't right. He could feel it as surely as he felt the cool wind on his face. And as the drone hovered above the water, the dam looming solid in the background, Laurent realized that this morning was not going to be the quiet escape he had imagined. The first signs were there, plain for him to see. What they meant, he could not yet know. But one truth was already clear: this was no ordinary day, and whatever was happening here was far more serious than a forgotten boat drifting in the current. The silence of the overlook pressed in on Laurent as he kept the drone hovering over the dam and the barge below. The screen in his hands flickered with sunlight, his own reflection ghosting faintly across the live feed, but he barely noticed it. His eyes were fixed on the image of those crates and the slack ropes binding them down. Something about the scene gnawed at him with the persistence of a thought that would not be ignored. He adjusted the controls carefully, bringing the drone lower, closer to the surface of the water, until the barge nearly filled the frame. From this angle, the details were sharper. The crates were large, bulky things, weathered like the barge itself, their edges chipped and rough. He searched for markings, labels, anything that might indicate their contents. There was nothing. Not even the faint ghost of faded paint or the remnants of old stencils. It was as though whoever had left them there had deliberately erased all signs of what they might hold. That, in itself, was unusual. At any official work site, every crate, every barrel, every piece of equipment was tagged, numbered, and tracked. Unmarked containers spoke of secrecy, of a purpose not meant to be understood by passers-by. Laurent zoomed in further, and the ropes came into clearer view. They were coarse, heavy lines, the kind often used for freight, but here they were tied sloppily, unevenly, with ends fraying like hair split at the tip. Some knots looked rushed, others loose, as though whoever had fastened them had done so with neither care nor time. A lifetime of discipline had trained Laurent to notice such details. In the army, ropes and ties were secured with precision because lives depended on it. Nothing was left to chance. Seeing them in such disorder made his jaw tighten. He let the drone drift toward the front of the barge. The deck was streaked with stains, dark patches that bled across the faded boards. Oil, he thought at first, but something about the color seemed wrong. It was too uneven, too spread out, as though something heavier than oil had seeped there. He leaned closer, squinting against the glare, and felt unease coil through him. There were scratches, too, deep gouges along the edges of the crates, like they had been dragged hastily across the wood. The barge itself sat unnervingly still. The water lapped against its sides, gentle ripples catching the light, but the vessel did not sway. Laurent frowned, puzzled. It was moored, then, though no anchor line was visible from his angle. Another detail that made no sense. Why leave a barge tethered near the spillway, unattended, loaded with crates that bore no identification? Reluctantly, he turned the drone away from the barge, angling it toward the dam itself. The massive structure loomed on the screen, gray and immense, its face streaked with lines of moisture where the concrete had darkened over time. He traced along the base, scanning the spillways, the gates, the metal fixtures built to control the endless pressure of the water behind them. Everything looked as it should, until his eyes caught on a shadow near one of the spillway channels. He steadied the drone and inched it closer. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, just a dark patch where the concrete met the steel grate covering the opening. But as the camera steadied, the truth emerged. One of the metal grates was not as it should have been. It hung slightly ajar, tilted at an unnatural angle, one side fixed while the other gaped open. Laurent's pulse quickened. These grates were designed to stay locked in place, bolted down with industrial fasteners so strong that no natural force could have shifted them. For one to be hanging loose meant interference. Someone had tampered with it. He zoomed in further, his mouth dry, his breath shallow. The gap was narrow, but large enough for a man to squeeze through, or something else to be pushed inside. He had seen such gaps before, overseas, where sabotage often began with something as simple as a grate left unsecured. The drone hovered steady as his mind reeled back through memories he had buried. He saw again the levee in a distant desert town, its foundations undermined by a hidden charge, the water tearing through with unstoppable force. He remembered the panicked shouts of civilians, the scramble of soldiers trying to shore up what was already lost. He remembered the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that an enemy had exploited what seemed like a minor flaw. His fingers tightened on the controller, and a cold sweat pricked the back of his neck. He tried to steady himself, forcing his thoughts back to the present. The barge with its unmarked crates, the careless ropes, the stains, the scratches, and now the grate left open. It was no longer possible to write these things off as coincidence. They painted a picture he did not want to see but could not deny. Someone had been here. Someone had left things where they should not be. And someone had interfered with the dam's structure itself. The unease that had been tugging at him now pressed heavily against his chest. He looked up from the screen, sweeping his gaze across the overlook and the forest beyond. The world looked calm and ordinary. Birds glided lazily over the reservoir, the treetops swayed gently in the wind, and the sun continued its climb, warming the valley with golden light. Nothing on the surface betrayed the threat he felt coiling beneath it all. That contrast made it worse, as though the danger was hiding in plain sight, cloaked in serenity. He returned his focus to the feed. The barge floated in quiet defiance, its silent crates like watchers waiting for a signal. The dam loomed, its loose grate a wound in the armor of something meant to be impenetrable. His soldier's instincts screamed that he was seeing preparation, the first steps in something larger. He could almost hear the voice of his old sergeant barking in his ear, telling him that once you see the signs, you don't ignore them. You act. Still, for a long moment, Laurent sat frozen, torn between disbelief and the weight of realization. This was supposed to be his escape, a day to stand in awe of a marvel of human strength. Instead, he had stumbled into something far darker, and the certainty of it settled in him like a stone sinking into deep water. He knew with grim finality that he had not imagined the unease. The signs were real, and the dam, steady and immovable as it appeared, was no longer simply a monument to human ingenuity. It was a target. For a long moment, Laurent could not bring himself to look away from the loose grate. The screen in his hands showed the dark gap where steel should have been flush and immovable, and the sight gnawed at him like a whisper of something terrible waiting just beyond sight. His thoughts tumbled in a chaotic loop, memories of sabotage in far-off lands, the thunder of collapsing levees, the roar of uncontrolled water. He clenched his jaw, trying to anchor himself in the present, telling himself this was not war, not the battlefield. Yet the feeling that something deliberate was at work here only grew stronger, pressing in until it was impossible to ignore. The drone hovered steady, its camera catching the shimmer of the reservoir and the yawning mouth of the spillway. As Laurent adjusted the controls to pan back toward the barge, something else caught his eye. The water near the barge rippled oddly. At first, it looked like nothing more than wind teasing the surface, but the pattern was wrong. It was too uniform, too deliberate, moving against the natural rhythm of the waves. His breath caught as he brought the drone lower, narrowing the field of view until the water itself became the focus. There it was, a shape beneath the surface. Faint at first, like a shadow cast by something drifting below, but it moved with purpose. Not the darting flicker of a fish or the tumbling spin of debris. This was smooth, steady, and controlled. Laurent adjusted the angle, leaning closer to the screen, and the shadow revealed itself in fragments. A glint of sunlight off something metallic, the suggestion of an arm-like appendage, a faint reflection like glass catching the light. His throat tightened. He knew what he was seeing, though part of him wished desperately that he was wrong. This was no natural shape. It was a machine, sliding silently beneath the water's surface, circling the barge with slow precision. His fingers tightened on the controller until his knuckles turned pale. The image on the screen brought back memories he had long tried to bury. Overseas, he had seen devices like this, crude in design but deadly in purpose, remote-controlled underwater drones used to deliver explosives against ships or bridge supports. And this one, sleek and deliberate in its movements, looked far more advanced than anything he had encountered in the past. He followed its path as it curved around the hull of the barge, the water rippling softly as it passed. The silence of the moment was deafening. Even though he stood alone on the overlook with only the wind in the trees, Laurent felt the weight of presence, an invisible operator, someone out there with their hands on another controller, watching through another screen. The thought sent a chill racing down his spine. Whoever was guiding this machine had to be nearby. They would know what he had seen. And if they were watching the dam, then surely they had already noticed his drone in the sky. The realization tightened like a knot in his stomach. He drew a slow breath, trying to steady himself, but the dread clung to him with the persistence of a shadow at noon. His soldier's instincts roared back to life, unbidden but unrelenting. He had always thought he had left that world behind, but the sight of that mechanical predator sliding beneath the surface reminded him that danger was never far. It did not matter that he was a civilian now, that his only weapon was a drone camera. He was in it, whether he wanted to be or not. The machine vanished near the spillway, disappearing into the depths where the grate hung loose. The water smoothed itself once more, the ripples fading until there was no sign anything had been there at all. Laurent let the drone hover, scanning the surface again and again, but the shadow was gone, swallowed by the depths. His heart hammered against his ribs and his mouth was dry. He wanted to believe it was his imagination, that the sunlight had tricked him or his mind had conjured shapes from the current. But the metallic gleam, the purposeful movements, those were real. For several moments he stood frozen, his body still but his thoughts racing. He could hear the echo of his sergeant's voice as if from another lifetime. The first sign you ignore is the last warning you'll get. He had dismissed that phrase as grim exaggeration when he was young, but it had proved true more times than he cared to remember. And now, here he was again, faced with signs no one else could see, standing alone with the choice of whether to act. He shifted his gaze from the screen to the dam itself. It loomed as steady and immovable as ever, its vast wall of concrete dividing the calm reservoir from the violent river below. But now, he could not see it the way he had an hour earlier. It was no longer just a marvel of human ingenuity, no longer simply a monument to order and control. It was fragile, vulnerable. One flaw, one strike, and the balance could collapse, unleashing chaos on everything downstream. Laurent let the drone rise a little higher, giving himself a broader view. The barge floated silently, its crates casting long shadows in the morning sun. The water glistened, deceptively calm, as though nothing stirred beneath it. But he knew better. He had seen enough. He could not shake the conviction that what he had glimpsed was not just a curiosity or an old machine left behind. It was active, deliberate, and connected to the barge with its unmarked crates and the grate hanging loose from the spillway. His breathing slowed, steadied by resolve. He had promised himself never to be pulled back into danger, never to let the burdens of his past dictate his present. Yet, standing here, watching through the eyes of his drone, he knew he could not walk away. To ignore what he had seen would be to risk catastrophe. He could not let that happen, Not while he was here. Not while he had the means to act. He exhaled slowly, lowering the drone once more toward the barge. The camera panned across the crates, the frayed ropes, the stains etched into the wood. Every detail confirmed what his gut had already told him. This was no accident. Someone had left these things with purpose, and the machine beneath the water was part of that plan. He thought again of the invisible operator, the faceless presence guiding the drone below, and the thought made his skin crawl. Somewhere close, someone was watching all of this, playing a silent game in which the dam itself was the prize. Leron's lips pressed into a hard line. He knew he had crossed a line in his mind. The unease that had first brushed against him when he spotted the barge had solidified into certainty. This was serious. This was dangerous. And whatever was unfolding here, he was no longer just an observer. He was part of it now, whether he wanted to be or not. The hum of his own drone filled the air, steady and unwavering, and yet he felt no comfort from it. Below, unseen in the depths, another machine lurked, moving silently in the service of intentions he could only guess at. The two drones, one above and one below, seemed locked in silent opposition, each tethered to its operator, each bearing witness to something larger. Leron drew in another breath, his chest tight with the weight of decision. The day had begun in peace, with admiration and wonder, but that time was over. The shadow beneath the water had changed everything. He would have to act, and soon. The silence on the overlook felt heavier now, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath while he stared at the dark water below. The image of the shadow gliding near the loose grate replayed in his mind again and again, each repetition sharpening the edges of his unease until it was unbearable. Leron's hands, steady only moments ago, trembled slightly on the controls of his drone. He steadied them with a deep breath, forcing himself back into the discipline that had carried him through darker moments in his past. It was not the time to freeze or second-guess himself. He had seen enough to know that inaction was the most dangerous choice of all. He guided the drone upward, giving himself a wide vantage of the dam and reservoir. The calm beauty of the scene seemed almost mocking now, a painted mask hiding something sinister beneath. The barge floated in its strange stillness, the crates resting like silent witnesses, the frayed ropes moving faintly in the breeze. Beyond it, the spillway gleamed, a gateway through which the river thundered out into the gorge. To anyone else, the view might have been nothing more than another scenic marvel of engineering. But Leron knew better. He had read the signs, and every instinct screamed that this was no coincidence. He pulled his phone from his pocket with one hand, his thumb moving quickly to dial the number for the ranger station that oversaw the dam and its surrounding lands. His other hand kept the drone steady, circling slowly over the suspicious vessel below. The phone rang twice before a deep voice answered, calm but alert. "Ranger Station, Officer Bradshaw speaking." Leron wasted no time. He explained what he had seen, his words clipped but precise. He described the barge, the unmarked crates, the loose grate near the spillway, and finally the shadow moving under the water, the unmistakable gleam of something mechanical gliding where no natural shape should have been. He forced himself to remain steady, to sound measured and exact, though his pulse hammered in his ears. There was silence on the other end as Bradshaw listened. The officer didn't interrupt, but Leron could hear the subtle shift in his tone as the weight of the details sank in. When he finished, Bradshaw's voice was firm, stripped of any trace of routine. "All right, stay where you are. Do not approach the water. I'm dispatching a team immediately. Keep your drone up. Keep observing. If anything changes, you let us know right away." The call ended, but the words reverberated in his head. There had been no dismissal, no reassurance that he was overreacting. The ranger had taken him seriously, and that only confirmed what Laron already feared. The danger was real. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his palms damp despite the cool morning air. The drone drifted back toward the barge as he tightened his grip on the controller. He zoomed in on the crates again, scanning them as though a closer look might reveal their secrets. They gave him nothing, only their mute and weathered surfaces staring back. Yet, the longer he looked, the stronger the knot of dread in his chest grew. It wasn't just the objects themselves, but the silence that clung to them. A barge left without crew, containers without labels, ropes tied without care. It all spoke of haste and concealment. The surface of the water stirred again. Laron leaned closer, adjusting the angle as ripples spread in a slow, circular pattern near the stern of the barge. For a breathless moment, he thought he had imagined it. But then the water shifted once more, and there it was. The faint dark outline beneath, sliding just out of clear view. His heartbeat quickened. It was circling again, deliberate, like a predator testing its ground. He followed it with the drone, the camera dipping lower, his fingers fine-tuned to the subtle movements of the controls. The shadow moved with calm precision, then vanished near the spillway. Laren's gaze darted to the grate, still hanging loose, still open just enough for something to slip through. The sight filled him with the same cold certainty as before. That machine was not here by chance. It was probing, watching, waiting. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had called it in, done what protocol demanded, but a gnawing fear still pressed against him. The Rangers would take time to arrive, and in that time, anything could happen. His drone hovered above the water like a lone sentinel, but it offered no real protection. He was exposed, standing alone on the overlook, and somewhere close an unseen operator controlled the shadow below. The thought made his skin crawl. Memories flooded back of long nights overseas when his unit had stood guard over bridges or dams threatened by sabotage. He remembered the hum of distant generators, the weight of his rifle in his hands, the knowledge that somewhere out there unseen eyes were watching, waiting for the chance to strike. He had thought he'd left those days behind. But here it was again, the same invisible tension threading through the air. Only now he was armed with nothing but a drone and a phone call. The minutes stretched painfully. Every second felt amplified. Each gust of wind, each bird call, each creak of the trees around him. His gaze flicked constantly between the live feed on his screen and the dam itself, as though expecting to see something shift in the real world. The silence pressed on him, oppressive and heavy, broken only by the distant thunder of the river below the dam. He checked the barge once more. Nothing had changed. The crates sat where they were, the ropes fluttered faintly, the deck was empty and lifeless. Yet he felt no relief. He knew better than to trust stillness. Stillness was the mask danger wore before it struck. Finally, he lifted his eyes from the screen and looked toward the road winding down into the valley. He willed the Rangers to appear, to break the isolation that clung to him. His breath came slow and heavy, every nerve sharpened by the knowledge that he was standing at the edge of something larger than he could yet grasp. He had seen the signs, made the call, and now the waiting began. His drone hovered above the barge, and its camera capturing the quiet menace of the crates and the water below. Laron knew the machine beneath the surface might rise again at any moment, that its unseen master was out there watching, and though he could not see them, though the overlook stood empty except for himself, he felt it as surely as he felt the wind on his face. He was not alone. The phone call had been made, the alarm sounded. The responsibility had shifted, but the weight had not lifted from his shoulders. He knew what was at stake. He knew how fragile even the strongest structures could be when faced with sabotage. And he knew, with every instinct honed by years of service, that the threat he had stumbled upon was not something distant or abstract. It was here. It was real. And it was waiting. The minutes that followed stretched like hours, each one thick with the weight of expectation. Laron's eyes scanned both the screen in his hands and the winding road that cut through the trees below, hoping for the first glimpse of movement, some sign that the Rangers were near. The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the overlook and burning away much of the mist that had hung over the reservoir. But the brightness did nothing to ease the tension in his chest. His drone hovered steadily above the barge, its silent watch unbroken, capturing every detail of the crates, the ropes, the stains that darkened the deck, and the deceptively calm surface of the water. He had the sense of being the only one aware of a great secret, one that threatened to tear the valley apart if ignored. Then, at last, movement flickered through the trees. A truck appeared on the road, its engine a distant growl, and another followed close behind. Relief surged through him, tempered by the realization that the danger had not diminished. He watched as the vehicles pulled up near the base of the overlook and two men in ranger uniforms stepped out, their binoculars lifted toward the water. He raised his free arm and waved, signaling them, and one of them spotted him and motioned back. Within minutes, they were climbing the path toward him, radios clipped to their shoulders, their expressions tight and focused. Laron showed them the live feed as soon as they reached him. Both Rangers leaned over the screen, their faces drawn into grim lines as they took in the sight of the barge and its cargo. They traded a look between themselves, a wordless exchange that spoke of mutual concern. One of them muttered under his breath, but Laron could not catch the words. Finally, the older of the two straightened, his jaw set. "We'll need to get closer. We'll take a boat from the dock and check it directly." The decision was swift, professional, but it left Laron uneasy. The shadow beneath the water had not returned since he last saw it, but its absence did not comfort him. It felt instead like a predator lying in wait, invisible but present, ready to strike when least expected. He wanted to warn them, to tell them again about the mechanical shape, the gleam of metal under the surface, but he could see in their faces that they had already accepted the risk. Still, they asked him to keep his drone above the barge, to provide them with eyes in the sky while they approached. It was a role he could accept, though it tethered him even more tightly to the unfolding danger. He watched as the Rangers descended toward the small dock at the edge of the reservoir. A narrow boat waited there, utilitarian, the kind used for maintenance and patrols. They untied it quickly and pushed off, one at the motor, the other seated near the bow with a long pole at his side. The water parted around them as they cut across the calm expanse, their progress steady and determined. From above, through the drone's camera, Laron followed every movement, his heart pounding with each ripple their boat left behind. The barge loomed larger as they drew near. The ranger at the motor cut the speed, letting them drift slowly toward the hull. The second ranger stood, bracing himself, and reached out to grasp the edge of the barge, holding the boat steady. With practiced caution, he climbed up, his boots thudding against the deck. Laron adjusted the drone to capture his every step, zooming in as the man crossed the uneven boards, circling the crates with wary precision. For a few moments, nothing happened. The ranger bent over one of the crates, inspecting the ropes, running a hand along the wood. Then he froze. His head snapped up, and he waved his arm sharply toward his partner still in the boat. Even without sound, the urgency of the gesture was unmistakable. Laren's breath caught as he steered the drone closer, the camera tilting to catch the ranger as he pulled at one of the knots and pried the lid of the crate open. What lay inside turned Laren's blood cold. Rows of bricks, dull gray and unmistakable, stacked tight within the crate. And strapped across them, wires and timers gleamed faintly in the sunlight. Explosives, industrial grade, and in quantities large enough to shatter more than just the barge. Laren's throat closed as he realized what he was looking at. Someone had left enough firepower to cripple the dam, to unleash devastation downriver in an instant. The ranger recoiled, shouting toward his partner, who immediately spoke into his radio, his voice hard and clipped. The urgency spread like a spark to flame. Back on shore, more trucks arrived, men and women in uniform spilling out with equipment, radios crackling as commands were issued. The area was transforming before Laron's eyes into a coordinated response, yet his focus remained locked on the drone's screen, on the barge that had revealed its dark secret. And then the water stirred. It began as a subtle ripple, barely noticeable against the reflection of the sun, but Laron recognized it at once. He adjusted the drone, angling down, and there it was, the shadow sliding swiftly beneath the surface, no longer circling aimlessly but moving with intent. It cut a line straight toward the ranger boat. His pulse surged, and before he could stop himself, he shouted aloud, though no one could hear him from the overlook. "Watch out! Below you!" The rangers must have seen it too, for the one in the boat suddenly reached for the pole and jabbed it into the water, thrusting hard as the shadow neared. For a split second it broke the surface, and Laron's worst fears crystallized. Sleek metal, gleaming arms like manipulators, a body shaped for speed and stealth. It was no abandoned relic. It was an active underwater drone, alive with purpose and guided by an unseen hand. The ranger struck again, and the machine twisted away, diving sharply into the depths. The water churned, foam rising briefly before settling back into deceptive calm. Laron exhaled shakily, his hands trembling on the controls as he tried to keep the drone steady. His mind spun with questions. Who was operating the machine? Where were they? Were they watching all of this unfold, waiting for the moment to act? On the water, the rangers did not hesitate. The one on the barge vaulted back into the boat, urgency written in every movement. They pulled away from the vessel, shouting into their radios, their boat carving a hard line back toward the dock. Behind them, the crates sat in silent menace, their contents exposed, the danger undeniable. More vehicles were pulling into the overlook now, their sirens wailing faintly in the distance. Bomb experts, divers, additional rangers, the response was escalating into a full-scale operation. Yet, Laron remained rooted where he stood, his drone still circling above the barge, his chest tight with the knowledge that this was far from over. The explosives could be disarmed, the barge secured, but the shadow beneath the water haunted him. It had not been destroyed, only driven back. Its operator was still out there, watching, waiting for another chance. The confrontation had begun, but it was only the first clash in something larger. Laron knew it in his bones. The dam stood solid and immovable, but for the first time since his arrival, he saw it not as a symbol of human triumph, but as a fragile line holding back catastrophe. And now that line had been tested. The shoreline had transformed into something like a command post by the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Trucks lined the gravel paths, radios crackled in constant bursts of clipped conversation, and men in heavy protective suits moved with grim focus toward the barge. What only hours ago had been a quiet Saturday morning filled with the soft hum of Laurent's drone had become a field of urgency and high stakes, every motion carrying the weight of potential disaster. From his place on the overlook, Laurent watched it unfold with a heaviness in his chest, his drone hovering above to provide a bird's-eye view for the teams below. The rangers and technicians worked quickly, but carefully. The crates had been identified, their contents confirmed beyond doubt. Explosives, industrial grade, the kind used in construction, but here perverted for something darker. Laurent followed every movement of the bomb squad as they knelt beside the containers, dismantling the crude wiring and timers with hands that moved steady despite the gravity of their task. Each wire cut, each device rendered inert, was a small victory, but the sheer volume of it all made Laurent's stomach twist. Whoever had placed this here had not been planning for a minor disturbance. They had meant to destroy the dam, to unleash devastation that would have thundered down the valley with unstoppable force. Even as the explosives were disarmed, Laurent's eyes flicked constantly toward the water. The memory of the shadow, sleek and deliberate, was burned into his mind. The underwater drone had fled when confronted, but it had not been destroyed. Its absence was not comforting, it was ominous. He imagined it lurking in the depths, silent and patient, its operator watching from some hidden vantage. The idea that another set of eyes mirrored his own, observing the dam through an unseen lens, made his skin crawl. At last, divers arrived, their suits heavy, their helmets glinting in the waning light. They prepared their gear methodically, checked lines and communications, and then slipped into the water with a series of splashes. The surface rippled outward, then smoothed again, hiding them from view. For a long stretch of minutes, there was nothing. Only the faint bubbles rising where they worked beneath. Laren's drone hovered overhead, waiting, recording, while on the shore the rangers stood in tense silence, their radios alive with hushed voices. Then one of the divers surfaced, raising a gloved hand in a signal. Soon another followed, and with them they brought evidence. The machine was real, and it was advanced. They described its sleek body, its manipulator arms, its propulsion system. It was not a relic or discarded equipment, but something designed for precision, stealth, and sabotage. Laurent heard the words through the radio chatter and felt the chill spread deeper through him. His instincts had been right. A small team of rangers broke away from the main group, armed and determined, moving into the woods that bordered the reservoir. Laurent understood without needing explanation. They were searching for the operator, for the person who had guided the drone beneath the water and placed the explosives on the barge. The valley felt suddenly smaller, as though danger pressed in from all sides. The operator could be anywhere, hidden among the trees, watching the entire scene unfold with cold calculation. The hours dragged on as the operation continued. The bomb squad secured the last of the explosives, carefully lifting the crates from the barge and transferring them onto reinforced vehicles. Divers scoured the spillway, checking for other signs of tampering, while technicians marked the loose grate and began the process of resecuring it. Each success brought a wave of relief, but never finality. The sense of unfinished business lingered like a storm cloud refusing to break. Laurent finally brought his drone back to the overlook, landing it gently on the flat ground beside his pack. The propellers slowed, the hum fading into silence, leaving him standing in the fading light with only the distant voices and the roar of the river below. He knelt to power the machine down, his hands steady now, but his heart still unquiet. He had been told by one of the rangers that they would need the footage, that every second of what he had captured might hold clues. He agreed without hesitation, but the thought unsettled him. What if in those recordings lay some detail he had missed, some small piece of the puzzle that could lead to the truth? As he packed his gear, Officer Bradshaw approached, his boots heavy on the gravel, his face lined with exhaustion but lit with a flicker of gratitude. He stopped beside LaRonde and looked out at the dam, its massive wall bathed in the soft glow of sunset. "You may have just saved a lot of lives today," he said quietly. The words carried no embellishment, only a raw sincerity. "We still don't know who's behind this or what their ultimate plan was, but we'll find out. And your quick thinking made sure we have the chance to." LaRonde nodded, the weight of the day pressing fully onto him at last. He wanted to answer, to say something meaningful, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he managed to quiet, "I only did what anyone would have." Yet he knew that wasn't true. Many people would have dismissed the barge as nothing, a forgotten relic, or the shadow as a trick of the light. It was his training, his instincts, and perhaps some part of his nature that had made him stop, look closer, and act. As the last of the teams packed up their equipment, the sky shifted into hues of deep orange and purple. The valley, so tense and alive with urgency only hours before, began to quiet again. The dam stood unchanged, its vast wall unwavering against the water's pressure, a monument to strength and resilience. But LaRonde saw it differently now. Its solidity no longer brought only comfort. It was also a reminder of fragility, of how even the strongest structures could teeter on the edge of disaster when threatened by unseen hands. He leaned against the hood of his truck, his gaze fixed on the dam. The questions swirled relentlessly in his mind. Who had placed the explosives? Who had built and deployed the underwater drone? Why here? Why now? No answers came, only the certainty that someone had tried to shatter what others had built, and that they might try again. He thought of the people living downstream, families who went about their days unaware of how close destruction had come. That thought brought both relief and unease. Relief that they had been spared, unease that the threat lingered. When Bradshaw finally returned to him, he carried a small drive in his hand. "We'll need the drone footage," he said, "every second of it. If there's anything we missed, anything that gives us a lead, it'll be in there." LaRonde handed it over without hesitation, watching as the officer slipped it into his jacket. The exchange felt final in a way, as though the events of the day were being handed off into the official record. Yet, he knew for himself, nothing about this would feel final for a long time. He climbed into his truck at last, the drone case secure in the seat beside him. The engine rumbled to life, but he lingered for a moment before pulling away. His eyes returned once more to the dam, now cast in the last light of day, its face shadowed but still immense. It had stood strong, and it would continue to, but the knowledge of how narrowly disaster had been avoided settled deep in him. He had seen how fragile strength could be, and he knew he would never look at a dam, or at his own quiet weekends, the same way again. Driving down the winding road, the forest closing in around him, the events of the day replayed in relentless clarity. The barge, the crates, the loose grate, the shadow beneath the water. The image of the underwater drone surfaced again and again in his mind, its mechanical form sleek and alien, its purpose unmistakable. Somewhere, its operator remained free, watching, planning. The thought chilled him more than the crisp evening air. The road curved, and the dam slipped out of sight behind him. Leron tightened his grip on the wheel. He had not sought this role, had not intended to become part of something so grave, yet fate had placed him here. His drone, once only a hobby, had become a tool that revealed the truth. It might have saved countless lives. And though he was weary, though the weight of what he had seen pressed hard upon him, a part of him felt that same resolve that had carried him through darker days. After the storm of urgency and fear, a quiet certainty remained. He had acted when it mattered, and in doing so had preserved something far greater than himself. The questions would linger, the threat would not vanish overnight, but for now the valley was safe, and the dam still stood. Leron drove on into the deepening dusk, the steady hum of his truck a counterpoint to the roar of memory, knowing that this day would follow him always, a reminder of how close the world could come to breaking, and how sometimes a single voice, a single choice, could hold it together just long enough to endure. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next big story. If this one kept you on the edge of your seat, you'll love what's coming next. Check out our other videos for even more unbelievable twists and shocking discoveries. And share this video with your friends.